The bells tolled across the grey skies of London, solemn, heavy, as though mourning rather than celebrating what the crowd was gathered to witness. Lady Eleanor's breath caught in her throat as the sound reverberated through the vaulted ceilings of St. Bartholomew's Cathedral. Her heart beat far too quickly for her delicate frame, rattling inside her ribcage like a bird desperate to escape. Today was meant to be the beginning of her new life, but already it felt like an ending. She stood, small and fragile in her ivory gown, the lace sleeves trembling with every shiver that ran through her. The scent of beeswax candles and cold stone pressed into her senses, oppressive, suffocating. She could not lift her gaze from the checkered floor where her shoes rested, satin and pale, too dainty for the storm that awaited her. Beside her stood the man she was bound to for eternity, though his presence was anything but comforting. Edward Blackthorne, the Earl of Ravencroft, was a figure carved out of shadow. His tall frame dwarfed her own, broad shoulders hidden beneath a coat of midnight black. His face, striking and severe, seemed chiseled in stone, no warmth, no softness, only sharp lines and eyes like dark steel. The air around him felt colder than the winter wind sneaking through the ancient cracks of the cathedral. His very stillness was commanding, almost cruel, as though he could bend the air to his will. Eleanor dared a glance upward, and in that instant, his gaze caught hers. It was not a gaze of affection, nor even tolerance. It was one of possession, of warning. Her pulse faltered. She wanted to look away, but something in those unflinching eyes forced her to hold still, like prey caught in a predator's sights. The bishop's voice rose, solemn and steady, speaking words of union, of blessing, of two souls becoming one under God. The congregation of nobles, lords and ladies dressed in velvets and jewels, leaned forward with anticipation. Some whispered behind gloved hands, eyes glittering not with admiration, but with hunger for scandal. Eleanor knew what they thought. They saw her father's debts, his desperation. They saw her as a pawn, bartered away to the cruelest Earl in exchange for salvation. Her father stood in the front pew, his once proud figure slouched, his face pale with fatigue from endless gambling and creditors' threats. He did not meet her eyes. Shame kept him rooted, and perhaps guilt, though Eleanor wondered if guilt still had a place in his hardened heart. Her mother wept softly beside him, a lace kerchief pressed to trembling lips. She whispered prayers Eleanor could not hear. The bishop's voice slowed, drawing near the fateful vow. Eleanor braced herself, drawing a deep, shaky breath. She prayed for some hidden gentleness in the man beside her, prayed for some glimmer of mercy that might show itself now, at the moment when a husband should declare love, devotion, or at the very least, duty. Edward Blackthorne turned toward her, his lips parting. The world hushed, even the air stilled, as though all creation strained to hear his words. His gaze swept over her, but there was no softness, no compassion. Only the cruelty of a man determined to wound before the blade could be turned against him. "You may bear my name," he said, his voice deep, measured, and resonant enough to carry to every corner of the cathedral. "But you will never bear my heart. Consider yourself a widow from this night forward." The words struck like a lash. Eleanor's breath vanished from her lungs. Gasps rippled through the crowd, ladies clutched at their pearls, men shifted uneasily. The bishop faltered, his hand trembling as he clutched the holy text. Yet Edward did not waver, his face a mask of unyielding steel. Eleanor felt her knees weaken, her hands clenching tight around the lace of her gloves until the threads threatened to tear. Widow. The word echoed in her mind like the tolling bells above them. Widow, though she had not even been a wife. Widow, though her life had barely begun. Somewhere in the crowd, laughter hissed like a serpent, low, cruel, quickly silenced. Nobles lived for scandal, and Edward Blackthorne had given them a feast. Her humiliation was now a story that would be carried through every parlor and ball in London. She could already hear the whispers. The girl who was widowed on her wedding day. The earl who froze his bride's heart before the ink of the vows was dry. Her mother's sobs grew louder, her fragile shoulders shaking. Eleanor dared not look at her, for if she did, she might crumble entirely. Instead, she fixed her gaze upon the altar, upon the flickering candles that seemed to bow and sway in sympathy. She swallowed hard, forcing her composure. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. The ceremony continued, though every word rang hollow. The bishop's blessing fell like ash upon her ears. The binding ring, heavy and cold, slid onto her finger as though it were a shackle. Edward's hand, when it touched hers, was steady, strong, but void of warmth. It was the grip of a jailer, not a husband. When the final words were spoken, and the union sealed, the nobles rose in applause that was more spectacle than sincerity. Edward inclined his head slightly, acknowledging them, but his expression remained untouched. He did not so much as glance at Eleanor as he guided her from the altar, his gloved hand resting lightly but firmly on her arm, steering her as one would guide a reluctant horse. Outside, the sky had darkened. Clouds gathered over the cathedral, their edges glowing faintly with the last light of day. The air was sharp with winter chill. The carriage awaited, an imposing vehicle lacquered in black, drawn by 4 stallions that stamped impatiently on the cobblestones. The Blackthorne crest, a raven clutching a dagger, gleamed upon the door. As Edward helped her inside, his touch was careful yet distant, as though even this brief contact risked something he could not allow himself to feel. Eleanor settled into the seat opposite him, her gown spilling across the cushions. She dared to glance at him, searching his face for any sign of explanation, but he stared out the window, jaw clenched, gaze fixed upon some unseen point beyond the horizon. The carriage lurched forward, carrying them away from the cathedral, away from the city, and toward Ravencroft Manor. The silence between them grew heavier with every passing mile. Eleanor's thoughts tangled with fear and questions. Why marry her at all, if he intended to cast her into widowhood? Why cloak her in his name, only to strip her of every other part of a wife's life? She thought of the whispers she had heard before this day, of the Earl's cruelty in matters of business, of debts collected with merciless precision, of rivals who vanished from courtly favor as though erased by his hand. But there were darker rumors too, of a love long lost, of a tragedy no one dared name aloud, of Ravencroft Manor itself, with its shuttered wings and rumors of haunting. No bride, they said, had ever lasted long within its walls. The countryside rolled past, bleak and bare beneath the winter sky. As the sun sank, the first stars flickered faintly in the dusk. Eleanor pressed her hands together, her ring catching what little light remained. Widow. The word returned, over and over, with every creak of the carriage wheels. At last, the towering silhouette of Ravencroft Manor rose against the horizon. Its turrets pierced the sky like jagged teeth, its walls looming ancient and gray, half-shrouded in mist. Windows glimmered faintly with candlelight, though many were dark, lifeless, sealed. The sight of it sent a chill through her blood. This was to be her home now, a fortress, a prison, perhaps even a tomb. The carriage slowed, hooves striking against the stone of the courtyard. Servants lined the steps, bowing low as their master descended. Edward's figure, tall and formidable, cut through the fog like a blade. He extended his hand to her once more, polite, detached. Eleanor placed her fingers upon his, and together they mounted the steps. The great doors groaned open, revealing a hall vast and dim, the air heavy with age. Shadows clung to the corners. Tapestries hung limp, their colors faded. The fire in the hearth crackled weakly, as though reluctant to burn. Somewhere in the distance, a clock chimed, slow and mournful. Eleanor stepped inside, her breath shallow, her heart aching. She had left behind her family, her freedom, her future. And now she entered the house of the cruelest Earl, a man who had already declared her a widow. Whatever awaited her within these walls, it would not be love. Perhaps not even life, but Eleanor lifted her chin, her spine straightening with a fragile pride. If this was to be her fate, then she would face it with eyes wide open. The doors shut behind her with a thunderous finality, sealing her inside Ravencroft Manor. The echo lingered, as though the house itself whispered the truth she already knew: she was trapped. And thus began her marriage. Not of love, nor of companionship, but of shadows, silence, and a vow of widowhood.